afternoon and welcome to today's webinar, Building Community Partnerships for Emergency Preparedness. I am Keith Petty, founder of KIDaccount, a company dedicated to enhancing school safety through innovative technologies that manage security and accountability in the K-12 education environment, from car line to hall pass to reunification. So it's my pleasure to moderate this important discussion today. Our company proudly partners with the I Love You Guys Foundation and to enhance safety and preparedness in schools across the nation. We are joined today by two distinguished guests. First, please welcome Pat Hamilton, Alliance Director at the I Love You Guys Foundation, known as by some the grandfather of reunification, I believe, for his extensive work in safety protocols. School safety protocols. Also with us is Stacy Avila, the training coordinator at the I Love You Guys Foundation. Stacy's a former police officer and seasoned negotiator who has dedicated over 600 hours of training in school safety protocols, significantly impacting school safety nationwide. So together we'll explore the importance of community partnership in emergency preparedness and share hopefully some actionable items. So before we jump in, I want to welcome Stacy and Pat to maybe further introduce themselves. So Stacy, I'll start with you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. We really appreciate you having us, Keith. Again, as Keith mentioned, I am a retired police officer here in Colorado. I worked for the Arvada Police Department for 21 years until I retired just about 8 years ago. And the founder of the I Love You Guys Foundation, John Michael Keyes, offered me a retirement job that doesn't feel very retiree, as here we are, which is absolutely fantastic. Also a hostage negotiator with the Jefferson County Regional SWAT team. And it is just my pleasure to be able to go and train school safety around the country with the I Love You Guys Foundation and their programs. And I also, while I have the stage a little bit, I wanted, since we are doing introductions of ourselves, we would like everyone that is listening in on the webinar, just take a second. And I know it's a little different virtually than us being in the room together and getting to know each other. But if you would just type your name and job title in there, then that will help us know who we have in the room with us.
I like that idea. Yeah.
Absolutely. Pat, go ahead.
Well, first off, I want to say that I think you must have got I got the same speech that you did, Stacy. So from John Michael, I retired as well. So I retired from Adams 12 5-star schools here in Denver, Colorado, back in April. I talked to John Michael and he said, hey, I have this great retirement opportunity for you. And I don't feel very retired either, but I love the work. So it doesn't feel like a job either. It just feels like what we do. Yeah, I was with Adams 12 for 23 years. My last 8 of those were chief operating officer. And I've been involved with the foundation in some form or fashion since 2008.
Wow.
But I did serve on the board of directors, was the board chair. Of course, now I'm a staff member of the foundation and love this work. And thank you all for joining us today. Can't wait to talk about how we get our communities involved with crisis response.
Absolutely. Well, thank you both. I really appreciate that. So I think let's begin and to understand the unique approach of the I Love You Guys Foundation for emergency preparedness. And Stacy, I'll start with you. Stacy, what role do partnerships between schools, local authorities, community organizations play in creating a robust emergency plan? And how do these partnerships, how do they become fostered effectively?
Well, it's so interesting. Our partnerships are integral to our success. And I always found it of interest that whether it's law enforcement, our first responders, fire and EMS, and the schools, everybody that is coming together on, to an event, to address something that's happened at a school, thought that it would work if we had never talked ahead of time. Like everything was just going to fall into place. And of course, that's just not possible, right? We have to be able to plan together, prepare together, and that is really directly proportional to how well we will all recover from that event. And it's silly to think that the day of, in the midst of chaos, in the midst of crisis, that everything's just going to fall in place if we have never met, if we're trying to exchange business cards on scene.
Right.
So it's really so important that we really come together ahead of time. And it's really neat to see as I've been, and I've been around the foundation kind of since the beginning. I mentioned I was a hostage negotiator. So for those of you familiar with the I Love You Guys Foundation, it culminated from an event in Bailey, Colorado, September 27th, 2006, the Platte Canyon high school shooting. And it was the hostage negotiator at that event. And in 2009, started training with John Michael, and we were doing mostly kind of the debrief of Platte Canyon, and then started hearing a little bit about standard response protocol. And it was really caught my interest because I thought this is something really makes sense, common language, and shared language and shared expectation of behavior between everyone involved, between our first responders, between the school, between staff, between students. And it got my attention, absolutely. And what I found is that, and I'll let Pat answer this because he was there at the beginnings of standard response protocol. But it is so critical that as we're coming up with safety plans for our schools, that we're having everyone have a seat at the table, everyone be involved. What was that like, Pat, as you were kind of getting this started?
Yeah, so I mean, in our case, this was back in 2007. So John Michael's sister, Heidi, Sergeant Heidi Waltz with Broomfield Police Department. She's not a sergeant anymore. She was working with my district. She was running our SRO program for one of our municipalities that we served. And we started talking about ways to do this better. At the time, we were using crisis manuals that were 75, 80 pages, and they were scenario based. Which there's a place for that when you're learning, but at the classroom level, it's really it's down to those 5 actions. So we started talking about that, but it turned into an 18-month project for us to really learn about this, and it was lots of engagement with our students, with our staff, with the parents. Law enforcement obviously was involved with that engagement, all of our first responders, and then we started talking to the districts that were surrounding us as well, that were within the same county. There was multiple school districts within our county. So it just kind of turned into layers of the onion. But to really make this all work, we really did have to make sure that we were all talking about the same language. And you'll hear John Michael talk about this, and Stacy and I as well, as the standard response protocol really it kind of has a Trojan horse effect. So for you to really implement the standard response protocol with fidelity and do it the right way, it is designed to get all of those voices in the room together to start talking about this. Because, in our case, we had 5 different law enforcement agencies that served our school district. We had to have all of those law enforcement agents they had to understand when we said lockdown or secure or hold, we needed them to know what we were talking about. And then those 5 agencies served other school districts. So you could see how it multiplies. So that's the importance of having this community engagement and this community involvement part. It takes time, and you never can stop once you start. You have to always keep those people engaged and keep that nucleus that you have of people that are focused on this work, keep them together and keep focused on this work. But yeah, Stacey, it was definitely a time-consuming project. I think it's much quicker now for people because the protocols have been developed and there's easy access to those materials. So we were starting from scrap basically, and so it took a lot of engagement to make sure that we were doing things right. And even then, we did some things wrong. We used the term, we had lockout and lockdown for a long time, and that was too confusing. So we had to change that to secure. So it's never perfect. There's always a reason to continue working on this. Don't settle for this is really good. Always push for that. We want this to be amazing and great.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
we have to keep evolving. And we also, it is such unusual. I kind of mentioned this. It's so unusual to have our first responders working with educators because the language is so different. Management practice is so different, right? It feels like these are such 2 foreign entities that it would never work. And the magic of it is it does. And it
Yeah.
starts these conversations, and it gets everyone of this, let's get in this mindset of working together. So it's the Trojan horse analogy is very good, Pat.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
not
excellent.
John Michaels.
And we're seeing that. I'm sorry, go ahead, Pat.
I said it's not mine, it's John Michaels, but I like it
Oh,
because it is true. Yeah.
right, right. And we've been at a few of your trainings and even the simulation of the reunification, and it's just a fantastic program. And we see it in the market, the terminology when we go to our customers, and we see that the difference in terminology from law enforcement as well. And to offer that consultation, to bring that back into that common terminology, I feel is very important. So, Pat, I have a question for you. During the emergency scenario, whether it be a gas leak or some serious event, what systems or processes should schools have and their partners have in place to ensure that every student has been accounted for, like even in real time?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely ways to approach that work in different ways, and some are maybe more efficient and effective than others. If you go back to back to kind of predate what we were doing, even in the foundation, roll and attendance was taken on paper. And
Right.
oftentimes you wouldn't get that information that, the front office of the school, or if a school was using some sort of student information system, oftentimes that data and that information wouldn't get to the school till the end of the day or maybe even midday. So there's a couple of different ways to approach that. But real quick, all of this has to work together. So
Right.
the very first thing in any type of crisis is you have to have a protocol and how you all are going to respond to that. So we happen to like the SRP. I think that works really well. It's very easy to understand. So you've got to know what you're going to do in that situation. And you'll hear us say, if you go to one of our trainings, during every one of those scenarios, we want you to take attendance and note the time. Take attendance and note the time all through the phase of those crises.
Mhm.
You can do that again on pen and paper, or now what's becoming much more available to people is the ability to do that electronically through an app, through your laptop, an iPad, or something like that. And that way, and what that does is it instantly notifies and updates that student information system. So you have an accounting that not just it's available for someone to see in the classroom, but it's available for someone to see at an incident command center that's trying to manage this crisis as well. So
Right.
that's the fastest way to do this now, is to do this through some sort of application. Like, for example, KIDaccount, you can do that in your KIDaccount system. Is you can have an accurate tracking and accountability of students, accounting of students right there that then feeds your student information system. And that's really critical because as you
Right.
communicate parents during a crisis, you're going to want to know about location of students as well. So all of those things tie together. So it's response. You got to have the response. You have to have a way to communicate with parents. That's really critical. You have to know. You have to have data and knowledge that way you're going to communicate with parents. That comes back to that instant accountability of students that you can get through applications that are in the market today. So those are some of those critical steps for sure. Stacy,
And
what
I
else?
think that,
Oh, go ahead,
I'm sorry,
Keith.
go ahead,
Yeah.
Pat.
Oh, I was asking Stacy what else, what does she think about that?
Pat knows
Thank
I'm a
you.
talker, so he's like,
You
we got to
go.
give Casey an opportunity always, or else she'll take it all over. So that it's interesting what you talk about with Pat, with the take attendance notes to the time, which we talk about. Anytime you have a change of status, making sure that you're noting that. So, we talk about take attendance note the time when you're in the room. Say if, for example, you have gone into lockdown, take an attendance, noting that time. Who do we have? Who are we missing? And you're really at that moment starting to gather all the information that you're going to need to ultimately have a successful reunification, to ultimately have successful notification for your parents or guardians. And so I think that sometimes we think, oh, I will be too busy thinking about other things or dealing with other things. Don't do that. Practice it. Make sure that we drill it that way. So then you're more likely to have that behavior in a more stressful event. Because if we think about it, a lot of the times the things we're doing reunifications for, it's not the school violence event. It's your gas leak, the water main break.
Right.
Pat, how many reunifications did you guys have in Adams 12?
So in my 23 years,
Lot,
I've
right?
looked at 30, yeah, 30
Yeah.
reunifications.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you mentioned like something like the gas leak, because what that leads to is reunification. If you have an accurate accounting of your students before you have to go into a reunification process, that will
Mm,
make reunification way easier and way more efficient.
absolutely.
Yeah, because you're not starting from scratch. You're not starting from a spot where you just don't have optics into how many students you expect at the reunification site. All of those things matter when you're planning your reunification. And yes, you're going to do a lot of pre-planning for a reunification long before that day ever happens. But then in that moment, there's going to be some planning right there. How many students are coming? How many parents should we expect? How are we going to communicate with our parents? All of that communication is driven typically through some sort of student information system, which
Yeah.
relies on accurate accounting of those students in that moment so we can talk to the right people.
So you're right. That role called that student staff accounting, so critical to setting up a good reunification. So let's talk about the reunification and maybe some critical considerations for ensuring a smooth and secure reunification process, say between students and their approved, right? Their approved parents and guardians. And how can partners such as law enforcement, community organizations, and technology partners support schools in those efforts?
I think the most important thing is having the process. And kind of we were getting to this just a few moments ago. Your process is your process is your process.
Right.
Don't change it up because, oh, this seems like a bigger event, or this is not that big of a deal, so let's just kind of make it work on this. We don't have to go through the big process because that's too much of a hassle. It's not. If we don't practice it on every time, we're not going to be able to really hone our skills and have it work on the, one of the more stressful events. So having that process, everyone having an understanding of what their roles are, what to expect. At a lot of our trainings,
Mm.
I hear our law enforcement kind of talk ahead of it saying, oh, well, we won't have much to do with reunification. That's, that won't be anything that we have to do. And I always chuckle to
Right.
myself and I'm like, hold on, because you absolutely have a role. And it's really important that we understand what those are ahead of time. In addition to that, your role might be unexpected. Who knows, day of, you might get a tap on your shoulder of, hey, we need you to step in this point or this point. And so having an understanding of the process, and I always train it this way. Anybody that you have that is going to be involved day of needs to have an understanding of the process ahead of time.
Right.
We all have the same ultimate goal of getting our students back with their parents or guardians that they're supposed to be with. But we also have to acknowledge we each have different responsibilities and accountabilities that are required in the reaching of that goal. So if we can appreciate what each of us of our jobs are and knowing what that process is, it will just make it go that much better. And again, that recovery piece is so important. It is, if we have gotten through an event, because I think schools are really getting adapted. Okay, here's how we handle these events. But
Mm-hmm.
the next conversation is, what do we do after? And that's our
Right.
reunification. And as I'm kind of talking to folks calling in, asking about trainings, reunification is the hot thing right now about we need to get better at this. We
Yeah.
can't just, send everyone out onto the football field and say, go find your kid. We have to
Right.
process. The schools have to have that accountability piece. And I will say, as being former law enforcement, if we come and we don't think there's a plan or it looks like chaos, we will come take it over. But that doesn't take into account all the accountabilities that the district have, as the
Right.
schools have. We'll just try to solve the problem quickly, but it often this will be a shock, right? Will cause more problems. So don't have it be that. Let's know our roles ahead of time.
I've
Yeah,
heard the term, the law enforcement, owns the event, the school owns the student. I guess it's kind of to that point. You both have to know both, right? So law enforcement isn't showing up, not understanding, how the school is going to be dealing with that. So we are finding out that in our experience in the market that the reunifications really aren't being drilled, right? So they're not being drilled like the event is, right? You have the alarm, you do your thing. but where they're not taking it. And that's to your point. We've got to get to that point. And there are a lot of resources out there with I Love You Guys and some of the training opportunities. So, and we appreciate all that you do. But I have another question. Go ahead,
Keith,
Pat.
before we move on from this, I do have a few opinions on this one. So
Yes, I love to hear that. Thank you.
yeah, I mean, first off, 30 reunifications, and I've told Stacy this before and others as well. I've never had one perfect reunification, but I've had 30 successful reunifications. And I attribute that to what you were just talking about is the drill or the practice of, and then also knowing who is going to be on the team. So we have to move beyond the thought that the school that's been the impacted site, whether that be a school or whatever that is, that team there that's responsible for managing those students on a day-to-day basis is going to be able to be the reunification team, because they're not.
Correct.
They need to remain in that role of student management. So a teacher is going to stay a classroom leader and a teacher. The principal is going to be involved in the process, but they're kind of doing what they do towards the tail end of the process, which is they're there to be that last face that our parents and our students see, because it's important for them to give some assurance to what's going to happen the next day. It's the hug and go. It's all of those things. To practice this, though, does not have to be. It sounds like, oh my gosh, practicing this would be really, really difficult. In this case, unlike a lockdown drill where we want to practice with everyone, the students and everyone, and there's no trauma, no drama in a lockdown drill. But for reunification, you can practice that with just adults. And that's what we would do. Every year, my district, we would ask for volunteers from our central administration building. We typically would get about 100. We would train those people every year. And then about a month or two later, we would have a practice. And so we would take that group and we'd break it into groups where you have some that were going to be students, some that were going to be parents, and some that were going to be the reunification team. And we would just practice with those adults and run through it a few times. It's similar to what we do in our reunification exercises. We kind of follow the same process. But you don't have to go through getting students to stay late or something like that. Now, it's great if you can. We've done that as well. We've offered to buy pizzas for some students, and maybe we have 25 or 30 students that stay late that day, and parents that say, yep, we'll practice. We get the importance of this. So you can do it both ways, but don't feel like you have to have students involved to practice your reunification. You definitely don't.
And I would even say, Pat, the importance of having, especially at the start when you're kind of getting comfortable with the process, better to do it with just us, right? And just kind of, if you'll feel more free to make mistakes that you can learn from and expand from there. And I also think there's really a benefit to having your reunification team have the opportunity to see from different perspectives. So have an opportunity to role play as a student, to role play as a parent or guardian, and you get to see what it looks like from the other side. And I really think it makes you more empathetic and have a better and more full understanding of the importance of then ultimately what your role will be on the reunification team.
For sure.
And what we're seeing, go ahead, Pat.
I was just going to say, one of the things that we often hear from people that we do these reunification exercises with that are in that student role. You think, oh, the student role, we're just going to hang out. We're going to wait for our parents to come get us. And that's true until you're the last student in the room. And all of a sudden, you're the last student in the room. That can bring on a little bit of stress for that student. So how are you going to manage that? Well, it's maybe not something that you're thinking about until you've sat in that seat and you were that last student, and you realize, oh man, we want to make sure that we have a good network of trusted adults around this student and make them as comfortable as they can. Sometimes I jokingly say that I can get through a reunification. The first 90% of my students are probably going to be gone in the first 45 minutes. And then the last 10%, it's going to take 2 hours, because they might have, maybe it's a snow day in Denver, like we've been having here. And so it's 2 hours to get across town, and maybe the parent works or the guardian works across town. And it can literally take 2 hours to get there. So just be prepared for that. Have your crunchies and your munchies, have some entertainment for those students. All those things matter, but you don't realize that until you've sat and maybe played that role of student. So it's important to be in all of those spots, standing in line as that parent, waiting to get your student, filling out that card. That can be stressful as well. And how are you going to respond to that? So those are critical that you practice all of those parts and components of the process.
And what we see is, as far as the staff engagement, every school, regardless, has a reunification every day, regardless of how you do it. There's a car line, right? Now, whether it's a KIDaccount car line or it's whatever it is, you have some somewhat experts on your staff that deal with those reunifications on a daily basis. Now, it's not due to an event, it's due to, picking up at the end of the day. But you might have some inside experts that can really assist. Any thoughts on that aspect of engaging that staff, that deal with those different environments?
I would definitely have them involved with all my planning. So as I was
Right.
planning on how the flow is going to work in the building, how the flow is going to work outside of the building, those people that live in that space every day, it's great to have their opinions. And that's good for an on-site or an off-site because they're used to dealing with with the challenges that comes with that daily
Exactly.
reunification that we go through. So even having them put eyes on a plan, maybe there's a facility that you've identified in your community that's going to be your off-site reunification area, having them put eyes on that and go and walk that site and walk that area around it.
Yes. Yeah,
They are subject matter experts because they live
they
it
are.
every single day. They're the front line. So I would have them at every planning meeting. I would want their opinion for sure.
And Pat, like you mentioned, it's really important that, especially for our offsite reunifications for perhaps a school violent event, that we don't want to have a reliance on anyone from that impacted site to have a role with the reunification team. That's just not fair. We've just experienced this big event, and then to say, okay, now switch hats and you're going to go greet 1,000 parents. It's too
Yes.
much to ask. But that being said, there are individuals that will want to maintain their job from what they maybe do at school. And I think we're all thinking of the person that works the front desk that knows everything, knows
Everyone.
the student,
Everyone. Yeah.
background, knows the software, right? Is so familiar with all of it. If they feel like, yes, this is something that is important to me to be able to continue that role at the reunification site, having them on the shoulder of a checker or having them be that resource there. If they do need to step away or if they aren't able to fulfill that, great, reunification can still go on. But it also offers that opportunity. And as Pat pointed out, having them, all of the folks that we might overlook, that we shouldn't, because they're really the ones that do this every day. Because as Keith, as you were saying, we're really basically, you do a reunification each and every day at every school in this country, right? Is a reunification. And so also thinking about more than just who works the office and who's familiar with the software, but so many times I learn something new every time I train our reunification classes. Right. The maintenance guys, no one knows the school better, the kids better, knows where the keys are, right? And just so not overlooking any, transportation, nutrition services, everybody needs to have a role in this. And maybe it's just a voice in the planning.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you brought that up, Stacy, because I was going to say that too. I was always surprised every year by who was in the room when we would ask for volunteers to be on our district reunification team. But it was people from all over, trades, like you said, trades and transportation. And man, it's all these people that care. And it's a coalition. So what they are is committed to student safety, because we didn't tell them they had to do it. It was a volunteer thing. So we knew they were committed before they ever walked through that door. And I loved having my transportation people on my team because they are very good at logistics and they understand. They are logisticians to the core. So I loved having them around, and then my maintenance guys as well, because they were kind of out in our district all the time anyway, so they could get to a spot very quickly and respond and start to set it up. So I loved having those people that have some mobility.
Right. So in general, Pat, what would you consider, say, the common challenges schools face when implementing the SRP and SRM? I know there's a lot of acronyms thrown around here. You might want to talk about those a little bit more, but what are these obstacles and how are they overcome?
So I think the SRP, standard response protocol, SRM, standard reunification method, I think the first thing is just starting, committing to yourself that you're going to start to do it. Now, we at the foundation, we've tried to make that a little bit easier. If you go to our website, iloveyoguys.org, you will find all of these resources and it's frictionless if you want them. They're at no cost. We don't ask for an email. We don't ask for a subscription or anything like that. You can just download those materials. We in our training, we say DIY, download it yourself. So we've tried to make that first step of just getting started easy, because here's a whole bunch of resources for you at no cost. Just take it.
Right.
Poke around the website, look at what works for you and take what works for you. And so that's the very first part. And then the next part is finding out who those community members are it's that coalition of the committed that we were just talking about. Who are those people in your community that you need to have around the table? Are there, so is it your law enforcement? Yes. Is it your first responders, your fire and EMT? Absolutely. They all need to be emergency managers for your city or your county. They all should be involved in this process from the very start. It will make it so much easier if you can involve them from the very start. Chances are someone in that room has probably heard of the foundation or is aware of the SRP or the SRM that has some familiarity with it. And that could make that transition a little bit better. But it's knowing that there's resources available to you, that you don't have to reinvent the wheel or try to create this from scratch, and that they're easy to get. That's key. And then inviting people from your community and then talking about it. It's the things that we're doing. It's not a secret. Your community should know that you have a plan. Your parents should know. Your parents should know what that means. Oh, if they hear the term secure or hold or evacuate or shelter, whatever that's going to be, they should know what that term means and what's happening in the school. So talk to them about it. Talk to them about how you're going to communicate when if one of those protocols is enacted. How are you going to communicate with your parents and let them know? Have those conversations. So it's a lot of talking and conversation at the beginning. It moves fairly quickly. It's not complicated. The responses themselves the response protocol itself is very easy to understand. But it's a matter of getting all of those people in the room together that have a role and a responsibility when you implement one of those protocols.
And did you find, Pat, that like your champions kind of expose themselves? You're like, oh, I didn't even realize from this worker group or this work group who's really can be the driving force. And that's kind of neat to see. I think another important part we talked about in the planning phases, but then also with implementation and with drills, as far as law enforcement go, I can speak a little to that, inviting law enforcement to come in for the drills. And so that we can see there's so many benefits. We're part of the process. Then staff and students get used to seeing us, right, as well. And then we're also getting to see the layout of the school, which is really, really important, and having an understanding of what that looks like and feels like. Another thing that we did this at my old department. Now we had school resource officers assigned to each high school and each middle school, but for our elementary schools, there was just one floater school resource officer. And so they assigned each elementary school to a sector officer, and we were supposed to just kind of stop by when we could, and a couple times a week. And I remember the very first time that I stopped at one of the elementary schools, and the gals in the office were like, well, what's wrong? What's wrong? And by the third time, oh, Stace, come on in. And we were talking with the kids and, reading stories to the kindergartners. Sometimes you're there at pickup time, sometimes drop off time, and just really working on being, kind of bridging that and making a relationship between our schools and our law enforcement, our first responders, so that we're not just there because something bad has happened, but we're really part of the community and working together on all of this stuff. And I think that can help some of these little challenges that arise. Would you agree, Pat?
Yeah, I would. And I'm glad you mentioned drills, because that's a way to keep your first responders engaged in this and ongoing. And ongoing engagement is another key part of this key. You've got to have those meetings at the very beginning, but then you have to stay engaged. The drills and inviting all those first responders to your drills so they can see how it works and get familiar with your schools and the staff and the students is a great way to continue that. We actually had an account set up. We had a little bit of funding set up, and we would tell our law enforcement agencies if they wanted to stop by any of our schools for free lunch, we would buy their lunch. Now, that's not a reimbursable expense through the National School Lunch Program, which is a whole other topic. But that's why we had a little bit of a budget for it. And it's not that we had a whole bunch of law enforcement officers take us up on that offer. But the few that you did with those people, you knew it was like, okay, here's someone that's committed. I want to make sure they get an invite to my drills. I want to make sure that maybe they would like to be invited to the choir concert or whatever that's going to be, because they're invested in that community, in that school. They like to stop by and have lunch with the kids, and those relationships, all of those things contribute to a more robust safety and security plan at your school. Think about it as a web, a spider web. The more strands there are, the stronger that web is. Having engagement and involvement from your law enforcement and your first responders and all things your school community will make that web stronger. So yeah, you just got to keep it going.
Did it help with the time on the drills too, being able to pair up?
Oh yeah. For our comprehensive high schools, we had, our comprehensive high schools were 2,000 students up to 2,300 students. And we would have, 15 officers, 16 officers there to help us coordinate and organize those drills and then respond. So when we were going around unlocking each door with the key to release that drill, it made that go so much quicker.
And then Pat, we're talking with kind of thinking first responders, because that's easy. I fall back there a lot. How did you get parents to buy in for like implementation? How were you getting the message across there?
I'd like to say that we just told them this is what we're going to do.
And then immediately they read everything.
And they're like, that sounds amazing.
And they're like, this makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. That would be great if it was that way. But what we did was we just put out the call to our school principals and our PTA associations and let them know, if you ever want us to come talk to your school, we're happy to do that for a PTA meeting. And then the other thing that we would do twice a year is we had big security events, and we would invite our entire community. So those would be on a weeknight, typically 2 hours, and we would go through and talk about what our security plans are. So we would do these 2 Wednesdays in a row, the first Wednesday or second Wednesday, whatever it was, but there was 2 different parts of it. So part of it was the mental health part of this as well. So we would have counselors and we would talk about our bullying programs. And then the next Wednesday, we would talk about our actual response plans and what we were going to do. What did reunification mean? So it was a 2-part series. First part being that culture and climate, about culture and climate to make sure that helps keep our kids safe. And then the second part was, what does it mean when we call her, and what it look like, and what if we have to evacuate a school? So it was all of those things. So we did that twice a year, and typically we would get anywhere from 100 to 200 people in the room, kind of depended what was going on in the country at that time. Obviously, a lot more interest if there had been some sort of active assailant situation in a different part of the country, then we might have a few hundred people in that room. If things had been relatively quiet, then we might only see 100. But the point is we did it every year, twice a year, and Adams 12 continues to do that now.
And the different stakeholders that we talk about, sharing this information, getting this common terminology out there. I believe the program does give examples or how to communicate, part of the program. Can you speak a little bit about that in terms of the standard, the SRP and SRM, and how you can engage the community, those parents? So for the car line, parents, part of it is training the parent, the parent understanding, the community understanding really what that means to engage with the school. So in the case of an event, to have that knowledge available, are you giving guidance to those administrators on how to manage that?
So, I'm trying to think what's available to us right now, Stacy, on our at iloveyouguys.org.
Yeah.
I know from doing trainings that I've certainly shared some documents with people before.
I was just going to say, is this a time for me to say that I shared the Adams 12 parental notifications everywhere around the country, because you said that, right? So we don't want you to have to reinvent the wheel. So we try to do is kind of plant the little seeds across the country. Someone will have, thought through, kind of pre-written. But what I really liked about your parental notifications, what they had in Adams 12, and I'm not going to let you talk about it, Pat, from your own district, but but having kind of that boilerplate you know, at this school, at this time, on this date, we went into a hold, for example, it lasted
Right.
this many minutes. And then at the bottom of it, a definition, hold, and here's what that means. I've seen other districts make the standard reunification SRP posters, but in magnet size. And then that's handed
Right.
out. So we can put that on the refrigerator. So if we are hearing something's going on at the school, our hope is that our parents and guardians will take the breath a moment, not think worst case scenario and think, oh, a hold. Oh, well, that just meant something. There was something that needed kind of cleaned up in the hall and was business as usual in the classrooms.
Sure.
Everything's okay, right? And so I think that good communication is the best way to prevent some of reactions that we're hoping not to have, which is everybody racing to the school, for example.
Right.
So luckily, our communications manager, Allison Jones, is watching this webinar, and she just sent me a text and said, those templates are in our SRP workbook. So they are
Yay.
available. And so we would kind of do this two different ways, though, too. There's that those templates are, that helps the district rapidly communicate with parents after a protocol has been initiated at school. And
Right.
you're going to respond, you know, for secure. I mean, obviously a lockdown, that's immediate. You want to be giving some information, what you know, tell people what you know in that moment. So that's what those templates will help you do, is the pre-populated. All you have to do is kind of go in and select a few things. The other thing that we would do, and you can find this at the Adams 12 website. I'm not going to give the website name. If you want it, reach out to me, pat@iloveyouguys.org. But we had a communication that we would send home with parents at the beginning of the year as well, and publish. And that was, it explained each protocol, what it was, and
Right.
then to step further was we would tell you how we were going to communicate with you for each one of those protocols. Because not every protocol is going to get a phone call, a text message, and an email. Some might just be an email because it was like, oh, your school was in hold for 5 minutes today while we were dealing with the situation inside the school, or you were insecure. Sometimes secures last 2 or 3 minutes. Your child's school was insecure today for this. Here's what that means. But we would tell them how we were going to communicate and that was important, because in an active assailant situation, if we're calling for a lockdown, we wanted our parents to know that we're going to call you, text you, and email you simultaneously. And in that situation, it's going to be every emergency contact associated with that student in that student information system is going to get that information. So it's going to be a big blast broadcast versus something that's a little bit like, this wasn't a big deal today. You're just going to get an email, but we also have explained that this is why you're only getting an email. So those things are important as well, as telling parents about how and why you're going to communicate, what these protocols are, and then having a template on your end, on the school district's end, to help you craft that message and keep that message kind of quick is important.
Yeah. And I know we need to wrap this up in a bit, but I have another question for Stacy. So Stacy, do you have some examples you can share of, say, emergency where effective planning and partnership made a significant difference? I mean, where you saw it happen, all this preparation, you saw it happen, the outcome was fantastic, during that safety event.
Well, I can say the one that's closest to my heart, the outcome wasn't fantastic per se, but the situation was much improved. So at the Platte Canyon shooting in 2006, ahead of that school year, the Park County Sheriff's Office in Colorado had done training with and inside the school about 2 weeks before the start of school, had done some active shooter training with staff, and had a very clear understanding of the layout of the school, had already, relationships with staff members and the like. That day, when Park County gets the call into their dispatch that a man had gone into the school, he had taken a classroom hostage, ultimately had gotten rid of some of the students and the teacher, and had 7 girls held hostage in the room. Now, Park County is not a large agency. There's maybe 4 deputies on the road at any one time. So a small agency, and they're covering a huge swath, almost 2,500 square miles of county. They had deputies at that door within 3 minutes of that call being made. And part of the reason is because they had trained in the school, they did not even have to stop at the office. They were told room 206, they knew where to go immediately. So that immediate response, this guy was on his way out with those 7 girls, pushed him back into the room, which made it a contained event rather than a mobile event, which for law enforcement is much easier to deal with. And ultimately, we were able to get 6 of the hostages, 5 out safe at that point, and the 6th hostage able to save her as well. So as I'm saying, unfortunate outcome in that we lost Emily that day, it was still one of the most profound examples of having an understanding, training ahead of time, planning and preparing ahead of time with our schools helped that response of the first responders, which ultimately saved numerous lives, right?
Right.
And I think there's example after example after example of this. And as we do a better job of bridging the gaps and increasing the relationships between our first responders, between our schools, between our communities, it only will help us respond to these situations. And the thing is, we are moving the needle in school safety. Now, Department of Justice, they have studied active killer events. And initially, when they first started kind of keeping track of the numbers, about 38% of them happened in schools. And where we are today, it is about 4%. And the reason is, it's because of all of the work that we have been doing, right? We are moving the needle in school safety. We are hardening our targets. We're paying attention. We're bringing in law enforcement to come and help with the drills or to eat lunch. Who would have thought that that would be a correlation you could make? But it absolutely is, right? And just these kind of conversations, and everybody that joined in today, that shows us that you're wanting to have the conversation as well. We're paying attention to it, and the outcome is not something to be minimized. That's huge, and it just heartens me so much to have that. I'm sure, Pat, also you probably have 1,000 stories as well where you saw improved outcomes because of the planning that you did ahead of time.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean every single event.
Oh, there he is.
There he is. Okay.
There we go. Yeah.
There we go. Little
yeah.
technical.
Am I back? Okay.
Yes, there you are.
Yeah. Well, I think we're at least it's at the end here. So
yes. Well, I have to turn off the my freeze Pat button so that I got a chance.
Can you do that? Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what we'll do, we'll go ahead and conclude. And Stacy, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for attending today. A special thanks to you, Stacy and Pat, for sharing your expertise and experience. Your contribution underscores the importance of comprehensive safety in schools and preparedness, right? But for those interested in exploring how technology can enhance your safety measures at your school's KIDaccount, we're here to help. So we offer some consultation, bring these techniques to life for you in that, sort of where the rubber hits the road. So please feel free to reach out to us. I believe Kim and Amanda have put some chats in the link. Hey, let's have a discussion. We can talk about how we can assist in bringing this preparedness to your educational environment. So thanks again for everyone involved, especially our partners at the I Love You Guys Foundation. We are grateful for your insight and your dedication to school safety.
Thank you, Keith. And we really appreciate being able to partner with you as well. It's like I said, it's very heartening to me to work with folks that the same goals and mindset. So we do appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much. Thanks again, Pat. We got Pat back here at the end, so it was a pleasure. And we look forward to working with anyone that have any questions to help your school safer for everyone. So thank you and have a great rest of your day.